Hey, family, happy Friday. And welcome to another edition of African Spiritual Conversations. And of course, I am joined by the Queen Mothers, the Yayas, the ES, all y'all who's up in here today. And how y'all doing today?
I'm good.
Right on, right on. What about you, Ifeoma Dupe?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's a good day.
I love saying your name. I feel like I have an accent when I say that. Ifeoma Dupe, I feel like I gotta play with my accent game. But I love it. So today I feel like one of the things we're going to talk about is how do we use our spiritual technologies, our spiritual tools, supplies, information, knowledge, wisdom to deal with generational trauma or just systematic racism or systems or culture or cultures of a lot of stuff. How do we use that to deal with that? And I hope you all who started joining and listening, Facebook got this new format and it's kind of interesting. I guess I like it. I hope that you would chime in and share your information, how you feel. So one of the things is that I hear a lot of people talking about being life coaches, and which I think is nothing wrong with that. But they want to do all this and they help people figure out their ways. But I also think sometimes when people are getting a life coach, maybe because they want a job, they want to buy a house, they want to lose weight, whatever, there's always some deeper underlining issues that we never really get to deal with. So it's kind of like, for instance, say if you trying to lose weight and you lose a whopping 80 pounds, but if you don't deal with the issues that made you gain the 80 pounds, the 80 pounds will be back with some friends.
Yeah, it's them friends that get you.
Right.
Cake is the friend of 80 pounds.
Right.
Good morning, team.
All that good stuff. So some of the things I think about in terms when I think of trauma or cultures, sometimes even the culture of somebody, once a young person, young people are always introducing me to things. I mean, even when I was younger than I am now, they would always say things. I would have to go, I'm gonna have to research that because tell me what that means or whatever. So they talked about rape culture. And I remember being in class, and when they said it, I was like, rape culture. So when you think of the word culture, it's like where you live your life, just how, what you do with your life, it's part of your culture. But then rape culture, then I had to stop and think about some of the things we say that backs up rape culture. When we say stuff like, well, she got raped, so like if she went and got somebody to rape her, instead of saying that, somebody raped her, where it takes the blame off of her and back onto the perpetrators. So we kind of do that. We don't mean to do it, I don't think, but I think that's how you kind of support culture and how sometimes it feel like the trauma or things that are being passed down keeps going down because we don't even know that we're doing it. It's kind of like when you say boys will be boys. What do we say when we say that? Like, you mean him, disrespecting a woman is like it's cool because, or it's just, don't get that man in trouble.
Oh, God, yes.
Yes, he did, he just murdered top 12 people, but he got health issues. Like, so how do you propose that we can start to use our spiritual technology to deal with some of these traumas? And I'm saying technology, systems, how do you propose that we do?
Well, this is a hell of a question. Can you hear me? Oh, boy. There are all the pat answers that come to mind. You pray, you meditate, you all of that stuff. But that really, that's all surface stuff. And I'm gleaning from what you're asking that you're asking for much deeper stuff. How do we really excavate our our spiritual landscape, or even our excavate our landscape, spiritual or otherwise, spiritual, physical, mental landscape. Um, well, first thing is you got to have patience. You have to have patience with yourself. You have to develop, and this is the hard one, because usually when we have these traumas, it's because we're lacking trust in ourselves. But you have to develop that trust in yourself. And you also have to develop um, a real transparency and honesty about what is going on with you. I think that's the crux of the question, really. How do we get, and we talked about this the other day, how do we assess our own shit?
Mm,
Um,
right.
you know, and oh my goodness, there's so many ways. But when you keep having the same thing happen to you, that, for example, you keep finding yourself in relationships that are um, abusive,
Mhm.
or um, or just not in your best interest, it behooves you to start looking within yourself instead of looking at, well, I think with any of this, it's within ourselves that we must look instead of looking for the outside. Many times, and I think this is part of the culture that we're in, we look to the outside to put, we do this as a people,
Mhm.
we look to the outside of ourselves to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. That it's somebody else's fault. It's somebody else's doing that has made us who we are. When really, it's who we are, the ones who are responsible for ourselves. So the first thing you have to do is be honest and look within yourself to find out what the hell is going on with me.
Right
Hard
on.
to do if you don't even know that you don't even know how to do that. You were never in a, let's say, a situation as a child where you didn't have parents that did that. You didn't have any, you had no one to model that kind of behavior for you. So, boy, this is a complex issue, but a very important one for us to discuss, because we won't get anywhere until we figure this out.
Right
How
on.
do we assess ourselves? How do we begin to heal our trauma? And one thing I want to say about it, when we talk about us as a people, um, to some degree, we have to stop blaming ourselves or blaming the system or blaming anybody. We've got to get away from the blaming game, accept that whatever it is, and then say, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to go about repairing myself? Because something happened to us, a whole lot of somethings really happened to us that we have to address. But blaming ourselves, that almost, you're adding another layer to the issue. Ifa Madukwe, what's going on in that beautiful head of yours?
I'm trying to sort it out. Okay, so there's two parts that I could see right from the question that you asked. Ro, one is like when we talk about rape culture, culture being what we do and why we do it, just oversimplification. And then the other part of it is dealing with the trauma of the experience of rape, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
So, just to kind of sort things or unpack it a little bit so that we can wrap our head around it. So from on the rape culture side, right? There's a set of behaviors, beliefs, and values that we have perpetuated that kind of keeps the party going. There's the ways in which specifically we have been indoctrinated with the idea that rape is okay. That has us perpetuated, like the devaluation of women, the um, the habit of what we call raising our daughters and loving our sons, kind of letting men off the hook for things that we feel are just in general behaviors that men have that we need to protect them from themselves because that's just a part of being a man. And then there's the post traumatic slave syndrome piece that has us kind of prepare for the experience of rape. And what I mean by that is we often will talk to our daughters and girls in a way that makes them feel responsible for being sexually attacked. And so we give them the predisposition of responsibility for other people's behaviors toward them and put them in a victim position. We position them to be victimized sometimes. Now, not all women do this because I will say that I've seen great progress with Black women in the way that we deal with each other, but it also still exists. It's this idea that modesty is based on fending off an attack rather than modesty for the sake of modesty, right? So we have the conversation about sacred womb less than we have the conversation about safety. So we introduced the idea early on that it's possible and highly likely that if you behave in some way that you're inviting rape. That's a part of rape culture, right? That's the thing that we perpetuate with our daughters. Don't sit on that man's lap. Don't do this, don't do that. And not that you should be sitting on a man's lap. It's the idea that the motivation behind what we're saying is infecting with fear rather than expressing a sacredness, right? But when you hold yourself sacred, then you protect yourself in certain ways and you avoid certain things because you understand your value. So as that conversation shifts, that part of it, we get away from the positioning of, I knew this was a possibility for this happening, I got caught slipping, rather than I don't deserve this type of behavior. Somebody needs to do something about this. So in the experience of, and we can tell how much progress we're making by the way that women respond after they have been raped. There's a lot of shame that women experience, right? It's amplified by the idea that somehow they're responsible for having been raped. And where does that come from? That comes from, if you do this, then somebody's going to rape you. But there's a piece of it that has been perpetuated from slavery. And that piece is that with the understanding that in having been enslaved during the period in which we were enslaved, women had to somehow make their daughters understand that when a slave master comes for you, you just have to survive the encounter. Right? And so that conversation has tumbled through time.
Yes.
Unfortunately. That's a conversation that we have with our girls when we start to see breast budding, when we start to see a period, when they get that little bit of stank on them where they walking different and all that little stuff. You know what I mean? You start to come into yourself as a young woman, right? This is a very sacred time, but it's also a time when you're highly impressionable. So the idea of value and sacredness of womb, if that's the conversation that you're having, it's a very powerful time to have that conversation because you're planting a seed that blooms throughout womanhood, right? But now if the seed that you plant is one of fear, and you have to be safe, and you can't fully express your sexuality because you'll be vulnerable to attack and all these things. Then that also, if you plant that seed, it will also grow. So we have to be conscious of the conversations that we're having with each other during the time of development, right? When the women surround you and take you in and begin to have conversations with you about becoming a woman. So that's one piece of it, the rape culture piece, right? And then also on the men's side, the conversations that men have with each other about acceptable behavior. I had accidentally tuned into some conversation, I think it was on Facebook, or no, somebody sent me a video. It may have been you, Ro, about it was two men having a conversation about
Mm-hmm.
dealing with women outside of the idea of what they can do for you,
You.
right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
this has been something that that conversation is I don't want to say triggering, but it's a live one for me. It's a live one for me because I always had this idea that um, relationships you can't have real intimacy in relationships when people are looking at you based on your utility.
Yeah.
And that goes for any kind of relationship, right? But a relationship that's so charged as like a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship or a marriage or something like that, if it's all based on the person's utility, this you'll never get to know them because you only want to know what they can do for you. And then you create a transactional relationship. Well, that's a customer merchant, that's a pimp hoe, that's a that's all these things that we say we're trying to get away from, but yet we kind of raise each other and socialize ourselves to react to one another based on what that person can do for you, right? Oh, I better be nice to them because they got such. Or the idea that a woman will let a man hit her repeatedly because he has a lot of money and she won't say nothing, she'll just cover up the scars with makeup. There's a time where the scarcity of resources for Black people, when you got in a situation that was comfortable, you didn't just leave it because of domestic violence or something like that, especially if there were children involved, because then where will you go? We're just looking at a short amount of time in history that women can even own property, that you could even go to the bank and open an account. Like, we take that for granted now, but there was a time when our grandmothers could not even go open a bank account. They couldn't have no money, they couldn't have no property, but they found ways around that, right? You go to a place that's underdeveloped, you buy a house. They have to push out to a little more difficult way, a little more challenging way of life that's kind of on the edge of development, and buy a house there or go to a new place. You know what I mean? They found a way around it because we know that Black women have owned property. Um, so there's that part of it. Then there's the individual dealing with the trauma of having experienced rape. And so for for um, for our spiritual technology, right? There's an investigation piece that we use, divination. There's an investigation piece where we look at all the pieces, right? Um, and then we look at all of the available support. In other words, what are the deities? What are the spiritual entities that will support the healing process, support the moving out of whatever damage has been done into rebuilding stronger, right? Moving the Ayewa into Ire, or and as we say in Ifa, but I mean it's however you say it. So there's the investigation piece, and then there's the piece of also um, medicines, that kind of support, soaps to clean off the energetic part of the trauma. There's herbs, baths, all those things. So that is going to vary from person to person. There are some things that may be consistent depending on the type of trauma it is, but overall, it's based on what that person's spiritual profile is, and what they need, who's going to come to their aid, and also specifically what kind of medicines they will respond to. So the thing about African spirituality is you get a unique prescription. It's not like going to a doctor where you have a symptom. They say, okay, you got this. you got this, you got this. Here's the medicines that address that symptom, rather than here's the thing that's going to heal you, right? And so you don't know sometimes if you've experienced something that has tumbled through time in your family line, you don't know, and you are predisposed because of maybe this is the conversation that the women in your family have, and it kind of puts you in a receptive position for rape. Like you're almost going out looking for it. Like I'm a rebel. I'm just gonna put this on, and I don't care. I get to be myself, but you really not secure in that. What you're doing is you're holding on to the idea that women are raped when they dress a certain way, and you're dressing that way and then saying you won't be raped, but you still got that idea, that tape running in the background, right? So then that means that there's a piece of your own personal Orisha, your own Ori, your own personal God self that has to be worked out so that you can even respond to a healing. Because you have to move that idea, move that belief out of the way in order to even be receptive for the work that has to be done for you. There are times when we need to change something in our lives. We need to fix a situation or a pattern, but we haven't created the fertility within ourselves to accept the healing. And so that we're the holdup. We're the thing that's holding us back, right? And then attacks are motivated by a lot of different things. And so there's jealousy, there's fights, there's, whatever, there's karma, there's, all these things. So we don't know for each individual person until there's an investigation that takes place to say, okay, now let's sort everything out and then address each thing, which is not, it's the shortest distance between 2 points, but it's not the simplest. Do you know what I mean? It takes a certain amount of skills, it takes a certain amount of training, it takes a certain amount of time, it takes effort, sometimes it takes money. It's all these things that you have to invest in the process of actual healing rather than just putting a Band-Aid on it. That's not like take a Tylenol. Oh, it hurts. Take a Tylenol. You know what I mean? When the thing that's hurting really needs to be, you got to pull the scab off, you got to clean the pus out, and you got to put some medicine in there, then you got to wrap it up, then you got to let it have sunlight, then that's a whole process. So when we shift our ideas around how we value ourselves, then we can begin to unpack these things and really heal them from the root, because that's what it's going to take. And that's what the spiritual technology, in my opinion, that's what the spiritual technology does. That's so amazing.
Well, the thing about that, though, is and all of that is what has to be done. That's why I say you have to have patience, because if you're 45 and you've been going through this all that time, you're not going to fix it in a year, unless.
Right. Well, you could. The thing is, like, there's a difference between healing and cure.
Yes.
Right. So when we make those distinctions, then we can heal a particular thing, and we may heal it 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. But the actual cure that needs to take in the body temple at that time may take some time, because you personally have to. You have to deal with it on a different level, right?
You got to do the work.
So sometimes when someone is raped, they have physical damage.
Yeah.
Right? So that's something that has to be cured. But a healing can take place in the mind, and then the spirit, and then the body will respond to that by accepting the cure.
But you have to, no buts, true. You have to acknowledge. I'm at this place of acknowledging that there is an issue to be healed. There are a lot of us women, Black women, who have been raped. Some from childhood, some constantly during their childhood, and so forth. And we have pushed it down so far within ourselves that we don't even know that some of our behavior, let's say our I can't think of a good word, but our loose behavior is as a result. Um, what's the name spoke about this? I can't. Oprah spoke about this. That this is one of her issues. Um, that we can't even deal with whatever it is because it's so far. We've pushed it so far down, and so that's my thing. How do you get to recognize those pieces of yourself that and outside of divination, because everybody doesn't go for divination. We
Well,
have people,
I don't know any way outside of
me either.
divination
Um,
to be able to do it. Like I would say, because there has to be like that scraping that gets to the
yes,
core of the issue, and that's really the way that I know to do it. Now there's a lot of different ways of divination, right? It's not always a Ifa priest. Sometimes
okay,
there's
yes,
you may have a medium in your family who is given the words to say that will bring that thing out of you. Like there's a lot, but I don't know that without the spiritual piece,
peace,
you cannot get to the core of that thing,
exactly.
because it has so many different pieces to it, right? And a lot of it is ancestral, right? So
Hmm.
Oya Kali made the comment about fear around women reaching puberty. That's a fear that was a thing for us to celebrate. You know what I mean? In indigenous cultures, we celebrate women coming into puberty because
Yes.
that's a sign that now we're welcoming a woman into the community, right?
Hmm.
But in the enslaved experience, that's a whole nother thing. Now you
Yeah.
have what once
Yeah.
was a child is now vulnerable to having a baby by the slave master.
Yeah.
Once that
Yeah.
first period comes, that's the first thing that you think about is now if she's raped, she's gonna
Yeah.
have a baby by this
Baby.
fool. So
Yeah.
do you know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
we taken that, and also you got to think that from this is a terrible thing to think about, and so you don't have to think about it. But there's also the piece of the rapist, right?
Yes.
That a rapist that rape is a power,
Hmm.
it's power violence,
Hmm.
and so women have inherent power that
Hmm.
depending on who they are, it shows up in different ways, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
adolescence is usually a time of great awakening of your spiritual gifts. Like things start to come clear. Like you have the first, that when you first get to earth, that part of it, right, where you're fresh in and you still got a foot in heaven, and there's things that can happen at that point. But then there are things that happen in adolescence, there's things that happen in menopause, there's things that happen as you become an elder. And so these are all points of they're all touchstones for the experience of maturing as a woman. And so in these times where a lot of um, things are highly challengeable, in other words, there's spirit genetics that haven't been sorted out, we'll find ourselves around people who appear one way but are actually another way. And so there's the idea of patriarchy, that kind of witchcraft in the land gives way to this need to subordinate women, right? So before you can even get your footing good as a woman and step into your power, if you experience sexual violence, then it kind of stunts your growth in a way. You know what I'm saying? It can hold
Yes.
you back. It becomes a challenge for you now to blossom into your full womanhood. So
Hmm.
this is a way that you're attacked on many levels. So it's one of those things where when we start to recognize that that's what's happening, then we have to take countermeasures to neutralize, right? And then the
Hmm.
countermeasure is like from the cradle to the grave. It's the value of women,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
and that conversation being ongoing, and also the nurturing of those spiritual gifts and the nurturing of that womanhood, that power that is inherent to women, so that we have a different conversation going in the background. It should be at this point, even according to the Ifa's reading for the year, you should be scared to come out your mouth talking crazy about a woman.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? And
Yeah.
you know
But
that there's some women who we recognize even in church. You know what I mean? They got the
mhm,
evil eye thing going on. Don't let her put that eye on you, because then you don't know, you might run your car into a wall. Like, you don't. There's women. You know what I'm
Curse.
saying? We've known that there are those women that they label as witches or whatever, but
Black
they may
widows.
even come to earth fully tapped into that power, that you
Yes.
say something crazy about them and they turn around and look at you and it's all bad for you instantly,
Yeah.
right? And their
Yeah.
children know, and everybody knows, and they might run through husbands a little bit because the patriarchy. That's not her fault. If he can't keep
Mhm.
his mouth under control or keep his hands to himself, like, then he got to go. That's not, you know what I mean? That's a situation that you don't even get into. But the flip side of that is those women tend to be very attractive. They tend to be very, magnetic. So they keep a man, kinda.
Yes.
They don't necessarily keep the same man.
They
So,
they yeah,
Usually, Ida,
they keep a man that's going to do what they want him to do at that
right,
time.
but I mean, and then they also have this. The energy of their goddess is so
Yes.
strong, right?
Strong.
That it
Yes.
makes that man feel like $1,000,000.
Well, you know what's going through my mind, but uh, I'll leave them out of the conversation. But you got to the crux of the matter that I wanted to really get to, and that is that there is a spiritual component because we are made of more than physical and mental pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that spiritual component may not in from our language, Ifa language, be divination. It can be hoodoo. It can
Mm-hmm.
be voodoo. It can be Nile Valley science. It can be all sorts of. It can be somebody read. Now I know this is African spirituality, but it could be someone reading tarot cards, or it could be someone working the rooms. But because there are a lot of different ways of being in contact with spirit.
Yeah, but the spiritual technology is to tap into that piece of you that is
Mm-hmm.
untouched by the human experience, and bring that energy out for your healing and for your evolution, right? So that you
Mm-hmm.
become more your God self. So sometimes the challenges happen so that you can become even more, right? So this is a part
Yes.
of the human experience, that we all have our particular challenges. And then when you look at things that happen generation after generation after generation and form a culture around them, right? An energetic, like, container for themselves, then that's when you got to really get into the work, because this is what, white supremacist delusion, patriarchy, racism, all these things that we are bucking up against have formed, they are institutionalized. So when we say institutionalized racism on a spiritual level, that means that it has formed, it's created a foundation for itself and found a way to sustain its energy. And so then the question is, because everything that does that eats, what is it eating?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take away its food
And
first. You know what I'm
who's
saying?
feeding it? Who's
Right.
feeding it?
Who's feeding it? What is it eating, and who's feeding it? So,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the things that when we talk about people being, murdered in the streets by police, those being ebos, who what is that energy? What is the ashe from that feeding, right? Because we know that it's not furthering the black community. That would be a different. That would look different. It would look like us taking arms, standing up, and going to a very explicit war against our enemies. And then when we die that way, right, then that those spirits are now revered ancestors, and that ashe comes back to help even further us in the fight, because these are spirits that now lack the limitation of body, right? Because you got certain limitations in a body that you
Yeah.
don't have, as that's why we call on our ancestors for support, right? So
Mhm.
then when we look at it like that, it's kind of like, I don't want to be nobody's elbow.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So you don't just jump out there without any deliberation, without any divination, without any direction, without any protection. You just out there just doing stuff. Like, we've tried that
Yeah,
generation after generation.
I
We've
was going
tried
to
that,
say, many
and
of us do that.
and it doesn't really work the way that we planned,
Hmm.
right? So entrenched in the spiritual discipline of any tradition of African spirituality, the fear of death changes into something else, right? There's a spectrum, of course. There may be some fear, but the understanding of what death is shifts for you,
Hmm.
and so that's not it. But you don't want to die for nothing.
Hmm.
You don't want to just die. You know what I'm saying? You want
How
to,
many?
if you age and transition, that's one thing.
Yeah.
If you have to leave your body in a violent situation in defense of something of value, that's another thing. But
Hmm.
just to be murdered in the street by the
That's,
police,
yeah.
you see
Hmm.
what I'm saying? That's something different totally altogether. Especially
Hmm.
when you know that you've been um, paying attention, right? It
Yes.
doesn't mean you got everything perfectly right, but it means
Exactly.
that your aim is true, right? And so you've done.
Oh. Oh.
Call. Hold on, she had a call. She gone.
Uh,
Hold on, y'all. We had a call come in. So
uh, 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 uh.
your sisters, brothers on here agreeing exactly. So
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So, yes.
there
Okay.
you
I
go.
gotta
Come
put
on
my
with
phone
it.
on sleepy time. Sorry. I forgot today because I was running late. But yeah,
That's right.
that's what I just, we have the technology. Sometimes I hate to see things happen the way that they do. I know that sometimes it's necessary, but I also know that one, you can look at a thing and instantly be clear that things could have gone differently had there been some investigation, some spiritual technology applied. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
there's a lot of different there's pieces to the spiritual technology. There is the self development, the mental piece. There is the skill piece in terms of what you need to be thinking about doing physically with your hands. Right? It was like we talked about yesterday: the wealth, wisdom, consciousness, and work. Putting
Yes.
all those pieces together, right? Because we do need a foundation of generational wealth
Hmm.
Right.
wherever we are, right? So we should be working on that too. I can't hear you, Ralph.
So can you hear me
Okay,
now?
yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you.
So as we have like 4 minutes left to go on the show,
Okay.
is there any way we can offer up this sister's question when she says, what has been the most impactful books, authors informing your knowledge of African women's spirituality? That is a great question that we're going to wrap up with.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
Altar of My Soul by
Vega,
Dr. I can't think of her last name.
Vega,
I want to say Morena, but it's who? Vega.
Vega. Yeah, I'm trying to get the.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll
Sabonfu Somé, her books. She has about three or four of them. Um, there's this Ia that is really good, and I can't think of her name. She just put another book out. Uh,
Ayele
yeah,
Kumari.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Her books, Louisa Teish's books.
oh gosh, yeah, Read, not Jezebel. What's it called? Louisa Tisha's book. Starts with a jambalaya.
Maya.
I'm
Mhm.
not good at remembering titles.
Well, I can give you a
But you
whole
know
lot.
what? I've learned the most from talking to elders. I'll just be honest. I
Well,
mean, I
Yeah.
love a good book. I do. But this is the kind of realization that happens in conversation. And oh, Fama has books too. But her
oh,
intro to Yoruba religion is a good book to have.
her books
Um,
are amazing, but careful on Amazon because they're asking some crazy prices.
yeah, I think all the books we don't have consistent printing, so that's the issue. But yeah, the best thing is just sit down with some elders and have some good old conversations. Like sometimes you got to go out of your way to make it happen, but I would definitely even even when you're reading, like then some of these women that have written these books, you can sit down with them.
You sit down and talk with them. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, you can sit down with them. They are here in the States.
Well, this was a great conversation. We're going to wrap up, y'all. We will see y'all next week. Have a great weekend.
but
Peace, family.